Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone, and especially the organizers for having invited me back to my old place where I spent only 5 years of my life, a long time ago, as an undergraduate and a graduate student. Well, what is to be done? It's an old question, resonated 100 years ago or more. However, what I'm going to talk about very briefly, because it's 15 minutes, is the state of affairs in the EMU countries and what I call the basic defect in the construction of our European economy, which couldn't be avoided, but it is so, because unlike what we learn in our textbooks, it is structured around an export economy, Germany, which has been an export economy since the Zollverein, and that's a long time ago, never ceased to be, and always, if given a chance, will go back to being an export economy. Now, I want to clear up, before everything else, that Germany's export surplus is mostly with us, the other European countries, and with the EMU, MAU countries. People think that Germany's export surplus is with China. Well, it is not true. It is an export deficit with China, but it has a very, very remarkable export performance with China, which is now a more important partner than France. However, where they export is to other EMU countries, mostly, and to the 27 countries of Europe, and that accounts for 90% of German trade, and of German surplus, sorry, not of German trade, 75% of German trade and 90% of the German surplus. So this is something which I remember writing about in 1980, saying this was going to be a problem with the European integration process, because as the Germans have got an export economy since the Zollverein, we, the others, have a tendency, most of us, to be rather more rigid than Germany and to have price levels that tend to go a bit more up. And if you are under the same monetary regime, this is going to constitute a problem, especially if the ECB is another unique exemplar. There is only one, a unicum, because it was the only way it could be done under the circumstances, a central bank without monetary sovereignty. There never was another one. They cannot create money to fill the deficit of the state. This is, well, it's not really a unicum, because the Banque de France, when Napoleon started it after the tragedy of the Assignats, had the same thing. They could not buy the state's bonds in the primary market. But then Henry Thornton, a name that resonates in Britain even today, noticed at the time that they very well could sell the bonds to merchant bankers, and the merchant bankers would sell it to the Banque de France. So it was one more passage, but it would be ending the same way. And I don't think in our case it's worked out the same way. So we have this unicum which cannot perform the functions of lender of last resort, but could be extremely able in looking after the crisis because of a mechanism called target and other settlement systems and other relationship with the banking system in Europe, which are much more modern. The status is very recent, so it's much more modern than what happened in the United States with the primary dealers. So that was a success story. The non-success story, which I didn't expect at all personally, although I have been dealing with this subject for a long time, is that the German financial system, banking system, would be in such a bad way because of the crisis, especially because they didn't have a housing boom. The last housing boom was at the unification. the reunification, they had the usual housing boom one has with reunifications. They had twice, 1870 and the last time. But then prices in Germany of houses even declined, kept declining. So that was not the case as in many other countries. And still, when chips were down, the banks in Germany, especially the Landesbanken and other banks of that ilk, were in trouble. But there was an explanation, very similar to the trust banks in Japan in the 1990s, that they had been given another function to perform where the state guarantee was taken away by my countryman, Professor Monti, at the instigation of Deutsche Bank, just because we are under Chatham House rules, we can say that. They hated their guts, and so the thing was done safely, securely, but it did happen. And in the last, but since you always negotiate what happens, in the negotiation they were given 5 years in which they could keep the state guarantee. They kept it, and they went into a bonanza of madness, feeding the housing booms in other countries, especially in the United States, Greece, and Spain. And so, in the end, they found themselves in perilous conditions. So the German government obviously did not really realize that, because they started very bombastically saying, we have a very different system from that of the United States, and therefore we are not in the same problem. They were told that they had a problem, and then they acted, and they acted rather fast and rather well, but with a change of stand which was rather, well, bad for their, say, reputation abroad as a government. Now, the problem with the state of things in Europe now is that, as Martin Wolf has repeatedly written in the Financial Times, and we have said it for as many times all over Europe, that what the Germans call themselves virtues for, other people consider not much of a virtue, because first of all, the deficit in the public accounts of Germany is quite large, and according to the European Commission, they have not said how they're going to look after it. It's 5%, it's not too little after all, just as much as the Italians have, who are supposed to be not very good at it. But also because the export surplus is not only with the rest of Europe, and that makes it rather fragile, because people can take rather unpleasant stands if they are pushed on these matters, but also because it is achieved, of course, with a very remarkable investment policy on the part of the government and of business decision makers in Germany. So they have gone very deeply into changing their industrial structure, but also because they have recreated what used to be called Mitteleuropa, that is to say a large area of economic integration with the countries that used to belong to the Eastern European, to Comecon, plus Austria, plus a bit of Sweden, plus a bit of northern Italy, a bit of Belgium, and parts of France. Now, that is a productive structure which is extremely efficient, but the Germans have been rather tough at reorganizing their own structure. So in going towards this relocation of part of their productive structure, they have created large-scale unemployment in Germany, which is extremely well looked after because they get unemployment benefits that are very high. But that is, again, something which is very expensive. So the way in which this virtuosity is achieved, and now they say that we should go the same way as they do, and we don't understand how by going the same way as they do we can get the same result as they are getting now. I mean, you don't have to be Keynes to understand these little macroeconomic difficulties in which you fall if everybody tries to imitate Germany and become an export economy and tries to, of course, export to Germany, because Germany exports to us, so we have to export to Germany. So how does it work? Very difficult to conclude from that. So that is a bit of a difficulty, and I think that is what really underlies the problems we are having with Greece and with the other so-called, they used to be called the Club de la Méditerranée countries. Then they have Ireland, so that is a Hibernian country, got nothing to do with the Mediterranean. And so it became pigs and pigs, and these are, it's much worse than being the Club de la Méditerranée, being pigs or pigs. But these are the countries that have to, in the view of everybody else, try and get back into virtuosity. But it has been said that apart from Greece, the levels of sinfulness of these countries aren't very high. The case of Spain is a case in which they really fell into the crisis with some problems, but not with many problems. They have the best central bank policy in Europe, and they have probably the best public accounts as well. So the thing is very difficult to understand from when you start with these pieces of advice. Then you have the virtual Senate, which is Barry Eichengreen's definition of what is otherwise called the markets. And the markets are telling us that we have to do a Germany. But if we do a Germany, then we fall into the problems of easy macroeconomic compatibility, as we say in Italy. And so that is not really a solution. Rogoff tells us that if you have a public deficit of public debt of more than 100%, you grow at 1% less than you would otherwise. Well, in my case, in the case of Italy, that's probably true. I don't know whether it would be true for other countries. What I know is that the Deutsche Bank has had a forecast of public debt and of public deficit dynamics in the next 5 or 6 countries, and few are, and far between, are the countries that are not going to have 100% public debt compared to GDP in about 5 years. So that is, again, something to ponder, something to consider, and coming out of it is something which would require coordination. It would require a sort of European fund on the lines that Strauss-Kahn more or less anticipated this morning, more than the EMF. The EMF was a suggestion by Thomas Mayer and Daniel Gross, and we, that is to say, the Italians and the other poor indebted countries, were supposed to pay for it. Of course, as you can imagine, the Italian government didn't appreciate this proposition at all. So I will leave you, and if you want to read more about it, you can go on the site of this conference and read the whole paper, which isn't very long, with the, say, nothingness of my proposals, which don't really exist. But I do defy you to do any better. Thank you.